So there's more information on this even this morning. The money trail linked to a suspected Russian bounties plot targeting U.S. troops in Afghanistan. The New York Times reporting that American officials intercepted electronic data showing large financial transfers from a bank account controlled by Russia's military intelligence agency, the GRU, to a Taliban-linked account. That's according to 3 officials familiar with that intelligence. The Times also notes investigators identified the names of a number of Afghans in a network linked to the operation, including a man believed to have served as an intermediary for the distribution of that money. Afghan officials also confirmed over the past 6 months they have arrested several businessmen suspected of being part of a ring of middlemen who operated between the Russian intelligence agency and Taliban-linked militants. This all according to the Times. A White House spokesperson declined to comment on the paper's reporting, Mika.
Meanwhile, NBC News has solidified a timeline of when the White House learned about the bombshell intelligence. A person with direct knowledge of the intelligence says that the White House and top National Security Council officials learned about the plot in early 2019, well over a year before Trump claimed no one had briefed him about the matter. The Associated Press reports that Trump's national security advisor at the time, John Bolton, told colleagues he briefed the president about the intelligence in March of 2019. NBC News has not confirmed that reporting. The Trump administration insists the president was never briefed on the matter.
They're lying, of course. That's a problem when them lying every day. We know they're lying.
This is about our troops. Where does he stand? The source added that the information was, quote, out there at least a month before an April 2019 car bomb attack in Afghanistan that killed 3 U.S. Marines. NBC News has not confirmed a link between the bombing and any alleged offers on bounties by the Russians. But, Joe, the investigating into this continues, and what we know so far is staggering.
It is staggering, and the most staggering part of it is that the president was told about this in March of 2019 by John Bolton, lied about it a year later, claiming no one had ever told him about it. Of course, his press secretary and everybody around him lied about it. Grinnell, of course, he would lie about it. So, of course, he lied about it as well. And everybody's lying. But again, I hate to be a broken record. I said this was all going to come out. Just like I said, coronavirus, stop running against the coronavirus. It's going to beat you. Like, this is all really obvious stuff. And so if we're wondering, if you're a Trump supporter and you're wondering, does he have a shot at coming back and somehow winning? The reason he doesn't right now is because he keeps repeating the same mistakes. He keeps lying. And the most remarkable thing here is, through all the lies, we even now know about wiring. I mean, wiring between the GRU and the Taliban. And we're going to know more information. By the end of this, Charlie's probably going to have the wiring numbers and instructions.
Where's the shock for our troops? Well, if you're the parent of a soldier, don't you want to hear from the president right now? And he's cowering behind, I didn't know about it?
Well, and that is the most stunning thing, that the president, even now that it's become public, that Vladimir Putin has put a bounty on the heads of young men and young women, the age of his children. Donald Trump saying nothing. If you're a parent and your son or daughter is in Afghanistan fighting, and you find out that Taliban militants, Islamic militants will get paid money for shooting your son or daughter, and the commander-in-chief, because he cowers in front of Vladimir Putin every day, is saying nothing. And once again, he's pushing Russian propaganda instead of backing American intel agents. And we're showing these Helsinki pictures, Jonathan Lemire, very appropriate. You were the one that asked the question. Does Donald Trump believe Vladimir Putin, in effect, or the intel agencies? And he said he believed Vladimir Putin. And here we are. We thought that was a low point. Now we find out that American lives are at risk because Vladimir Putin has put a bounty on their heads, and the commander-in-chief of the United States of America is saying nothing. Nothing at all. Where do we go from here? Will the president continue to cower, and will he continue to refuse to condemn Vladimir Putin for trying to encourage people to kill young Americans fighting in Afghanistan?
President Trump has shown an extraordinary deference to President Putin, dating back to the 2016 campaign and throughout his time in office, most visibly, yes, at Helsinki, but throughout his time in the Oval Office. And, the reporting now by colleagues at the AP that this first came to light in March of 2019, it's truly remarkable. At the time, it should be said that the briefing then, according to our reporting, was a little less specific, that it was seen as sort of the latest front in Russia's attempt to muddle in Afghanistan. It was deemed not necessarily actionable, but it was still there. It was still on the radar. And think of everything that's happened between the president and Vladimir Putin since then, before this latest wave of reporting in the last couple of months about these bounties. He has tried to get Russia invited back to the G7, the expanded G7, back to a G8. He's talked about hosting Vladimir Putin at the White House, something that horrified a number of his top national security officials. And there hasn't been any sense of a shift in messaging. There hasn't been any condemnation from the White House as to what happened in Russia. There's a Gang of Eight briefing today. We've had Democrat and Republican lawmakers finally be read into this in the last couple of days. But the White House itself, even yesterday, from what was a very quick press briefing, they have not delivered any of the anger at Russia, but rather at the media. I think there's an old cliche in Washington that if you're going after the leaks, if you're going after the leakers, you're losing the political fight. And that's what they're doing right now. They're spending whether it was a statement from the DNI director, a statement from National Security Advisor O'Brien, and then from the podium yesterday, the attacks are about the media, the attacks are about the leaks, and their attempts to sort of defend the president and separate him from this intelligence. That seems to be their only play right now, despite the fact that even members of their own party are criticizing how the White House has handled this and demanding some sort of retribution from Russia.
Casey, at this time yesterday morning, we had Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin on the show, Democrat, one of them who was headed over to the White House to get that briefing about this Russian intelligence. She was hopeful that she'd learn more and get some answers. When she came out, she said she didn't talk to the right people, that the people who presented the intelligence were not those most familiar with it, and she'd like to talk to somebody more senior or somebody who had hands on this intelligence or was in the middle of the process. She did come out saying that there might have been debate about this intelligence, but for someone who worked at the CIA and the DNI and NSC as she did, she finds it not credible that this information did not make its way to the president. So how are Democrats and also Republicans on Capitol Hill reacting to this explosive story over the last couple of days?
You're right, Willie, that Elissa Slotkin in particular is somebody, and there aren't a ton of them in Congress. She has worked with intelligence products. She, if she sees the products in front of her, has a much better sense than the rest of us in terms of what that means. And she essentially came out, as you point out, and said, you don't just throw something into the presidential daily brief. It is not necessarily common, but it's also not uncommon to have divisions between agencies, among agencies about this kind of intelligence. But it doesn't just show up in the president's briefing book out of nowhere or without being discussed. So I think that underscores the seriousness, and her assessment of that is one that we should believe in and rely on. But the reality here is the way that the White House is handling speaking to members of Congress about this is completely contrary to how all of these matters are usually handled. There have been political people in these rooms, some intelligence officials, yes, but that's not the primary way they've been doing this. They are not including Democrats and Republicans together, or they haven't yet. The plan seems to be to brief the Gang of Eight today. The logistics of that still being nailed down, but we did report that yesterday, that sort of gang of the top top congressional leaders are going to be in the room. We think together, but we don't know for sure yet that that's how it's going to play out. That's not how this works. Usually, politics stops at the water's edge. And while there are always policy differences between the parties, learning about threats like this to the United States are something that does not break down by party. The White House has a duty to inform Congress. The intelligence community has a duty to inform Congress, members in both parties. And there's still a lot of skepticism, even among Republicans, on this, on the Hill, Willie.
Well, I mean, they're scrambling wildly, Mika, to try to cover this up. They have, obviously, the president knew about this. His National Security Council was begging the White House to do something about this in March. They notified the British government of this. The information was out there in Afghanistan. This is something they can't hide. But
this matters.
They're still trying. They're still trying to cover it up, cover up the fact that the president knew about this, knew that Vladimir Putin wanted to kill Americans and was going to pay Islamic militants to kill Americans. And Donald Trump, the commander-in-chief, did absolutely nothing about it except brag Bob about Vladimir Putin being his friend in May and try to invite him over to the G7, G8.
And Joe, based on my conversations with some Republicans and Democrats in the last 2 days, it's clear that this Republican argument about the intelligence is on thin ice moving forward, because anyone in the intelligence community on Capitol Hill knows that anytime Russia operates in Afghanistan or in a war zone, they're always working through an interlocutor. There's always plausible deniability in these kind of operations, so it doesn't seem like a direct line from the GRU and from Russia directly into the hands of the Taliban. But these bank transfers and this reporting from the Times and others shows that Russia's always been involved in these kind of operations and has been for quite some time. So the idea that the intelligence is somehow unclear, it may not be direct, but there has been a history of intelligence about Russia that Republicans know, who are deeply involved in these issues in Congress, that this is a likely story, and the intelligence community would not bring it forward in this way unless they were convinced about its accuracy to a point where, even if it's not direct, they feel confident about the information.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.